Okay, so this video I'm calling the problem of ideological exclusivism, specifically in the realm of politics. So to make my point about why ideological exclusivism is problematic in politics, I'm going to start by explaining some theories about religion and use religion as an analog to politics so we can kind of understand this point that I want to make. So in religious studies, there are three primary approaches through which one orients themselves towards their religion. So the first one is called exclusivism. Exclusivism is kind of like fundamentalism. Someone believes that only one religion is the one and true, holy, sacred, divinely ordained religion, and all the other ones are bullshit, right? So it's one religion is better than all the other ones, and there's really nothing to gain from all these pseudo religions. And some people equate exclusivism with pre-modern traditionalist types of thinking and being. Okay, the second one is called inclusivism. So inclusivism, I think of as that someone still thinks that one religion is better than the other ones, but you can still derive some value and some insight from the other religion. So you might still have a primary core center religion, but you're not totally closed-minded and closed off to the other religions, okay? And someone equated inclusivism with modern forms of thinking. The third one is pluralism, which some, of course, correlate with postmodern forms of thinking. And pluralism means that all religious ideologies are equally valid and all religions are equal, right? Kind of like the Unitarian Universalist approach. And then there is finally, some people say that the fourth one is like coherent pluralism or integrative pluralism, kind of like an integrative meta approach to religion, right? But the three main ones are inclusivism, exclusivism, and pluralism. Most people who I know who are in my circles, right? Spiritual people, people interested in philosophy, people in the meta communities, no one when it comes to religion that I know of in these circles is an exclusivist, right? No one says only one religion is right and all of the other ones are wrong. Because if you did that, you'd probably be a fundamentalist and would probably be in a more of a traditional religious environment or a religious community. So what the default understanding a lot of people have is that, hey, when it comes to religion, there are many paths to God, right? There are many paths to spiritual illumination. I can pluralistically harness the best insights from all religions and get the best practices from all religions and integrate them and put them all together into my own kind of unique spiritual practice and go about things that way. That's definitely how I look at things and do things myself too, right? I'm very inspired by Christianity, Christian existentialism, Christian mysticism. Obviously, I love Buddhism, some of the yogic teachings of Vedanta, Hinduism, Taoism, Sufi poetry, blah, 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 right? I think a lot of people here watching this video can relate to that approach. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to politics, so many of us are still trapped in exclusivism. We're all in some ways fundamentalists, right? I'm a libertarian. I'm not a socialist. I'm an anarchist. I'm not a statist. I believe in social justice and kind of a critical race theory critique of modern institutions. I don't believe in modern liberal universalism, right? Or some people can say, right, I'm a conservative. I'm not a progressive, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, why can't we be pluralists or even just inclusivists when it comes to politics, right? Why can't we look at politics like we do religion and say, hey, there are valuable insights and perspectives from every corner of the ideological spectrum, right? That we can steelman, that we can harness, that we can integrate into our political cosmology and how we make sense of complex social and political systems. But instead, we just double down like fundamentalists on one kind of religion and stuff all of reality into our little Procrustean box, right? I'm a libertarian, I'm a socialist, I'm a Marxist, etc. And we don't harness a larger array of insights. And of course, there's a lot of reasons why this is, right? There's kind of a larger problem of cultural polarization and our totally messed up state of political discourse, right? There are media incentives that drive kind of ideological exclusivism, and it's just not really a thing to be a pluralist or to be a inclusivist when it comes to politics. And so that's what I'm hoping to change with a meta-ideological approach, right? I'm hoping that through a meta-ideological approach, the starting point isn't a core ideology. The starting point is just emptiness, it's openness. And from there, we can begin to study systematically all of the ideologies, all of the mainstream political perspectives that are out there, harness the best insights from all of them and put them together into and integrate them and synthesize them into whatever specific policy position we're for or not for, right? One more thing, even if you want to be an exclusivist, I still think a meta-ideological approach can be helpful in being a better exclusivist, simply because if you don't understand and you don't steel man a certain ideology or perspective, it's not very meaningful to just reject it, right? The more you understand something and the more time you've spent exploring it, the more meaningful it is to say no to that and to double down on what you do believe in. If you're just dismissing a straw man of that ideology in your head, rejecting it in order to be an exclusivist is not as meaningful, fun, and juicy, in my opinion. So the more things we study, right, the more open-minded we are to at least exploring a perspective, even if it is really full of shit and this doesn't resonate with us at all, we can feel better about rejecting it because we know that we fully studied it. So I know what you're thinking. Ryan, politics is just not the same as religion, right? We're not talking about this metaphorical, numinous, spiritual, subjective, kind of stuff. We're talking about hard policy. We're talking about real world, real life ramifications and material implications, right? You're either going to be for Medicare for all or not. You're going to be for a $15 minimum wage or you're not. There's no room to say, I believe in Allah and I can do Tai Chi and go into this Wu Wei Taoist state, and then I can do Vipassana meditation, go in emptiness. Like, you can't do all of them. The material reality of politics is fundamentally exclusivist. So my response to this is, yes, that's completely true. But I think that a meta-ideological approach that harnesses the best of all ideologies can inform one's deliberation process, right? The background thinking process that gets you to create a certain position or gets you to back a certain position. And I think this can really help in our current time where there's so much polarization, people are tribalizing into one side. This kind of approach can really engender a lot of creative thinking, so we can think outside the box and come up really with the best ideas. So one example of an idea that I'm passionate about, that I'm thinking is informed from a meta-ideological approach, is this idea that I discussed with the economist Ocean Jarrow called the sovereign wealth fund, right? We can have a sovereign wealth fund, a national scale investment fund that gets its funding from taxation from any kind of resource extraction or any kind of economic operation that detracts from the commons, right? So in Alaska, they have what's called the permanent fund. And so I think it's like 25% of oil revenue goes towards this investment fund. We can call it the American Solidarity Fund. So it has a kind of patriotic, even nationalistic kind of element to it. The money from that's collected in this fund is going to be invested in the stock market. So it can be a kind of form of privatized social security, of only that it won't replace, public form of social security. And it'll be doing work in the supply side of things. It'll be helping businesses. It'll be driving up, driving the economy, increasing GDP. But it's also going to be distributed to everyone, either through a dividend or a kind of public pension. So there is a kind of socialistic redistributive element going for it as well, while harnessing all the benefits of compound wealth and putting that money to work in the actual stock market. So to me, it hits on multiple ideologies, multiple value sets. And I think this is an idea that's certainly worth looking into based on the meta-ideological integration of different ideas that I've studied, right? Libertarianism, democratic socialism, Georgism and neo-Georgism, right? About land value taxation and commons extraction, and even from conservatism and kind of a more conventional, traditional patriotic flavor of conservatism. So that's just one example of how we can play with different ideas to come to unique and creative ideas in which a lot of people from different sides, different political cleavages can hopefully resonate with and get on board with. I think there's also a subjective and even spiritual component to meta-ideological practice, where we can have a whole array of ideologies and perspectives and kaleidoscopically cycle through them, right? Steelman them, study them, understand the values that are at play in informing an ideology, understanding the worldview and even cosmology and causal implications of an ideology, right? What are its assumptions and ontological notions of human nature? These are very deep. These are very deep questions, and I think that we can cycle through them and see how an ideology impacts our consciousness and see how it phenomenologically impacts our view of the world. So when Margaret Thatcher famously said, "I don't believe in society, there's only individuals and families," that's a pretty radical thing, right? So I personally don't believe that at all, but I can try to take that perspective and see the world through that lens and think, how is that changing my consciousness, right? How is that thought that there's no such thing as there's no emergent social organism? Everything is reduced to individuals and families. How does that change how I view the world, right? What kind of policies would I tend to support if I saw the world in that way? So I think as a kind of phenomenological exercise, a meta-ideological approach can be very illuminating and can also help to break our perspective, our dominant perspective, our dominant worldview, and step into another one. Even if we don't fully agree with it, we can still do that as a kind of way to keep ourselves fluid and loose and understand all of the important insights that each ideology contributes, right? And I think of this also in terms of what group of political stakeholders is each ideology focusing on. So you could say capitalism focuses on capital and capital production and tends to favor owners and investors and employers, right? Socialism and Marxism is highlighting workers and the role of labor and the fact that workers and laborers are getting a raw deal in the in the capitalist system that we live in, right? You can think of conspiracy theory, conspiracy as a kind of ideology, right? We're focusing on corruption in government, corruption in the corporate sector, right? And how actors who are in a position of power through their top-down authority can distort public knowledge and create conspiratorial events that benefit a few and screw over the rest of everyone else, right? So all of these lenses, I think, are making salient a certain aspect of the system that we would otherwise overlook if we didn't use that ideology, right? If we don't don that ideological lens, we might miss out on something, right? Let's think social justice, let's think critical race theory, right? If we don't think about how certain identity groups are harmed by certain policies, we might not be aware that what worked very well for the dominant group actually fucked over the non-dominant group. Whoops, right? So it's good to be aware of that, right? It's good to be aware of from a libertarian perspective, how a government policy may have a very detrimental unintended consequence elsewhere, right? And we didn't see it coming, right? We could think about it from a complexity or systems science perspective, think about the various feedback loops that are at play, right? We can think about it from a evolutionary perspective and think about the selection mechanisms that select for certain agents and strategies in the system and what kind of selection mechanisms work best, right? Whether it's democracy, whether it's market systems as a kind of selection mechanism to select economic agents that are most efficient and creating the most value, right? There are moral considerations, there are philosophical, right? So we need to use all of these lenses to really come to the most comprehensive, complex, holistic understanding of reality, and transform ourselves in the process of doing that so we can arrive at the best policy points to create a thriving and flourishing human civilization.